Do you want your life to count for eternity? Do you want to make a difference and make a difference in the lives of other people who will make a difference in the lives of even more people? You can do this if you will make disciples. Today we want to talk about the Apostle Paul and how he made disciples. If you study his letters and the book of Acts very carefully, you'll see that there's about 30 names mentioned of people that served with him. And most of those people were people that he discipled. Every time he went on a church planting trip, he took 2 or 3 young men with him and gathered a few along the way, training them to be disciple makers, training them to be multipliers. I want to encourage you to always have some spiritually younger folks alongside of you so that you can be training them to train others. Well, how did Paul make disciples? Well, the key comes from 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 2. Paul was writing to one of his disciples. And he said, "Now, Timothy, the things you, Timothy, have heard from me, commit to faithful men who will be able to teach others." There's 4 generations of Christianity in that verse. There's Paul, me, the guy who started it. Timothy, you, the things you have heard from me. Commit it to faithful men. Timothy was the pastor of the church of Ephesus. He said, gather some faithful men in your church with the purpose of that they will be able to teach others. Paul to Timothy to faithful men to others. Well, how did Paul make disciples? He used 6 principles. First of all, he said to Timothy, recognize what God has taught you. What are the verses that have changed your life? What are the lessons God has taught you? What are the truths that have helped you grow the most? Teach your disciples what God has taught you. Second, identify some faithful men or women, somebody that you can really pour your life into. So recognize what God has taught you and then pour your life into some faithful people. You say, what's a faithful person look like? Well, I always look for 3 things. Somebody who's faithful, they're around consistently, they're available, they're not too busy or their life's not too complicated, and they're teachable. They want to learn, they want to grow, they want to minister to other people. Look for those people. Then he says, regularly entrust the things of God that God's taught you. Commit to these faithful men. Pour it into them. Entrust it to them. It takes time. A lot of times the way I do it, I'll have somebody in a group that I'm discipling, and then I will also try to get with them every few weeks outside of that group and talk about what God's doing. Fourth, invite them to serve alongside of you. Paul took his disciples with him. They went alongside of him while he was doing ministry. First of all, they watched him do ministry, and then they did ministry together, and then he let them do ministry. Number 6, he gave them the opportunities to serve without him. When you're leading a group, a certain type of group, there's a point where you turn it over and you let somebody else do the leading. There's a point where you just get out of the way and let them serve without you. The last principle is to remind them to multiply. That's what Paul's doing to Timothy, one of his disciples. He had spent a lot of time with Timothy for the last few years. So he sends him a letter and he reminds him, don't forget, Timothy, the things that you heard from me, keep it, committing that to faithful men with the goal that they can teach others also. Keep multiplying. Remind them to multiply. You can make disciples. A lot of you are pastors. You have some godly men, some godly young men, some high potential people in your church, some faithful people, available people, teachable people. Pour your life into these men and women. Recognize what all the stuff God has taught you. Identify them, pour it into them, let them serve with you, let them serve without you, and remind them to multiply. And that's what I'm doing today. I'm reminding you to multiply.